Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that nothing in your life has a built-in purpose. Not your job, not your relationships, not even your beliefs. You're free, completely free, and that freedom feels like a gift and a threat at the same time. What do you do next? For some people, it's thrilling. For others, it's paralyzing. And for a few, it's a revolution. This is the heart of existentialism, a way of thinking that exploded into Western thought over the last 2 centuries and still quietly shapes how millions live today. But what does it actually mean to live in a world without given meaning? Where did this idea come from? Who argued for it? And how can you use it to live a more authentic life? Not as a philosopher, but as a human being? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand existentialism's major ideas, meet the people who made it famous, confront the absurd, and get practical steps for turning existential freedom into a life you actually want to wake up to. Let's start where existentialism begins, with a question nobody wanted to ask out loud for a long time. What if life has no inherent meaning? That question didn't appear out of thin air. It grew from historical changes, modern science dethroning old certainties, the crumbling of traditional authorities like the church and monarchy, the trauma of wars and industrialization. People felt smaller in a vast, indifferent universe. Existentialism isn't just despair about meaninglessness. It's an insistence that meaning isn't handed to us. It's something we must create, and creating it is both liberating and terrifying. To understand existentialism, we need to meet its early voices. Start with Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Danish thinker who is often called the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard lived a life full of contradictions, an intellectual who felt deeply, and a religious thinker who distrusted systems. His central idea was that truth is subjective. That doesn't mean facts don't matter. It means that what truly matters in life isn't objective knowledge, but the passionate commitment of the individual. Kierkegaard introduced the idea of the leap of faith, the idea that certain truths, like God's existence, cannot be proven rationally, so you must decide and live that decision wholeheartedly. He also explored despair, the mismatch between who you are and who you could be, and argued that confronting your despair honestly is the beginning of becoming a true self. But existentialism left the church behind quickly. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher, turned the conversation into a cultural critique. Nietzsche famously declared, "God is dead," and he meant it as an observation. The traditional moral frameworks built on religion were collapsing. Without those frameworks, humanity faced both crisis and opportunity. Nietzsche looked at this void and asked, "What now?" He introduced the concept of the Übermensch, a figure who creates values, lives boldly, and embraces life's tragic side. Nietzsche's moral was not despair, but self-overcoming. He wanted people to say yes to life, even to its suffering, and to become artists of their own existence. He also emphasized the dangers of herd morality and the seduction of comfortable, unquestioned lives. Then the 20th century brought existentialism into full-blown cultural consciousness with Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir in France. Sartre's blunt formulation, "Existence precedes essence," became the slogan of modern existence. What he meant is simple and radical. Humans appear first, exist, and only later define themselves. There's no blueprint for what a human is supposed to be. You are not born in essence with a preset purpose. You make yourself through choices. This idea leads to 2 immediate consequences: radical freedom and radical responsibility. Freedom because you aren't bound by a fixed nature. Responsibility because every choice helps create what humanity is. Sartre dramatized these claims with concrete images. A man at a cafe choosing a life says yes, not only for himself but for all humans, because his choice suggests a model of how to live. This is why freedom is terrifying. You're not just responsible for your life, but in a sense, for the example you set. Sartre also identified bad faith, the habit of lying to yourself to escape this responsibility. Bad faith shows up as excuses, blaming circumstances, or pretending you had no choice. A classic example: a waiter who performs his role so perfectly he becomes the role, convincing himself he is nothing but a waiter, avoiding the responsibility of his broader freedom. Sartre's existentialism is ethics in action. Authenticity means owning your freedom and living as if your choices matter. Meanwhile, Albert Camus introduced existentialism to a wider audience, but with an emphasis on the absurd. Camus argued that life's search for meaning collides with a universe that gives no answers. That collision is the absurd. Camus didn't recommend suicide as an escape. He saw it as a refusal to confront the absurd. Instead, he offered rebellion, passion, and defiant joy. His image of Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill only to watch it fall, becomes an anthem. Imagine Sisyphus happy, he said, because he chooses to find meaning in the struggle itself. Camus' existentialism is ethical without metaphysics. Find meaning by rebelling against the absurd through commitment to projects, solidarity, and personal integrity. Philosophers weren't the only ones exploring these ideas. Literature and film became powerful mediums for existential thought. Dostoevsky's characters wrestle with moral and spiritual crisis. Kafka's worlds depict absurd bureaucracies that crush individuality. Beckett's plays reduce life to repeated, aimless action. Think of Waiting for Godot, where two tramps wait for someone who never arrives. These works show us existentialism in lived experience. Not abstract claims, but human beings forced to confront freedom, death, and the need to create meaning. By now you might be wondering, is existentialism just gloom and fatalism dressed as depth? Not at all. Existentialism is practical and urgent. It asks how to live, not how to escape. Let's walk through some core concepts and what they feel like in daily life. First, freedom. Existentialists mean more than just the legal ability to choose. They mean an ontological freedom. The fact that your identity isn't given. You're not determined by an unchangeable essence. And in each moment, you can choose who to be. Imagine a teenager accepted into medical school but considering painting instead. That choice isn't just about a career. It's a declaration about the person they want to become. Freedom can be exhilarating. You can reinvent yourself, and it can be paralyzing because every choice closes other possibilities. Second, responsibility. If you are free, you can't blame the world for who you become. Responsibility in existentialism is not simply guilt. It's the acceptance that your actions shape you, and often shape others. Think of small decisions. How you treat a stranger, what stories you tell about your life, whether you show up for someone. These shape your character. Sartre's dramatic twist was to say we also choose for all humanity. If you adopt cruelty as a principle, you're endorsing cruelty as a human value. That might sound extreme, but it's a useful way to underscore how seriously we must take our choices. Third, authenticity. This is the lived goal of existentialism, to act in ways that are true to yourself, not just conforming to expectations or hiding behind roles. But beware of romanticizing authenticity as pure self-expression. Existential authenticity is messy. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, accepting limits, and committing to projects despite doubt. Authenticity is an ongoing practice, not a final state. Fourth, anxiety and angst. Existentialists see anxiety not as a pathology, but as the condition of being confronted with freedom. Imagine standing at a cliff and realizing your choices matter. Anxiety is the dizzying sense of possibility and risk. Kierkegaard called it dizziness of freedom. Heidegger called it the mood that reveals our being toward death. These forms of anxiety can be paralyzing if avoided. They can be liberating if used as signals to make meaningful choices. Fifth, the absurd. Camus taught that once you see the mismatch between human longing and the universe's silence, you face the absurd. The proper response, he argued, is not despair, but revolt. Embrace life's contradictions and keep acting. The absurd allows for joy precisely because it frees you from illusions and makes every small meaning you create shine brighter. This is where existentialism becomes almost celebratory. Life's meaning is fragile because it's authored by you, and that fragility makes it precious. Now let's examine some practical everyday applications. How do you live existentially without becoming a brooding philosopher or a nihilist hipster? Start with small experiments in choice. Pick one area where you've been following script: career, relationship, daily routine, and make one deliberate choice that reflects who you want to become, not who you were expected to be. It might be as simple as quitting autopilot and saying yes to learning a new skill that resonates with you. Notice how you narrate that choice to yourself and others. Are you acting out of obligation, or are you choosing in freedom? Practice owning your projections. When you blame, "I had no choice," or "that's just how I am," translate it into the existential language of responsibility. I chose this because you'll likely feel the weight of accountability, but also the power to change. This is the core of escaping bad faith. Make a ritual of confronting mortality. Existentialists aren't obsessed with death for morbidity's sake. They use the reality of death to sharpen values. Try a simple exercise. Imagine you have 1 year to live and list what you would do differently. What relationships would you prioritize? What projects would you start? Then, without dramatics, take one step today toward that list. The goal is not to live as if you're dying every second, but to let mortality be a guide to what matters. Cultivate projects that resist the absurd. Camus recommended rebellion through commitment. That means embracing projects you care about: art, caring for someone, learning, activism projects that are meaningful regardless of cosmic judgment. The point is the engagement, the refusal to surrender to futility. Also, practice compassionate authenticity in relationships. Existentialism can sound selfish if misinterpreted as radical self-expression, without regard for others. But the idea of being authentic involves taking responsibility for how your freedom impacts others. That means honest communication, choosing to be transparent about your needs and limits while respecting others' freedom. It means creating relationships where both people are allowed to grow and change. Now, some common objections and misunderstandings. A lot of people assume existentialism ends in meaninglessness or cynicism. But existentialism is not a license for nihilism. It asserts the absence of pre-given meaning and the presence of human agency. Meaninglessness is the starting point, not the conclusion. The most famous rebuttal comes from Camus's joyful Sisyphus. The point is not that nothing matters, but that you can make your effort matter by committing to it. Another objection is that existentialism is too individualistic or Western. It's true that classic existentialists emphasized individual choice, but contemporary thinkers and movements have integrated existentialist themes with social critique. Simone de Beauvoir, for example, applied existentialist insights to feminism, showing how social structures constrain freedom and how liberation requires both individual and collective action. Existentialism can and does intersect with politics, race, gender, and community-oriented ethics. A final criticism is that existentialism is impractical, yet many people who identify with its spirit find it deeply practical. Therapies like existential psychotherapy use these ideas to help people find meaning, face death, and make authentic choices. Writers, artists, entrepreneurs, and activists have drawn from existentialism to shape creative lives. Existentialism's practical fruit appears when it converts anxiety into responsibility and stasis into action. Let me tell you a story that captures the existential turn. There's a real-life figure, a French woman named Jeanne Calment, who lived to 122 and famously said she had no regrets. Now that phrase is usually shallow, but think about what it could mean in existential terms. Suppose Jeanne lived through more change and loss than most. Wars, deaths, cultural upheaval. To say no regrets might be an assertion of authorship. She chose her responses, accepted losses, and made life meaningful by how she lived it. Whether she truly had no regrets is irrelevant. The point is that existential living reframes regret as a resource. Regret can be a teacher, a spur to change. Facing the past honestly and choosing differently now is an existential practice. Another example, imagine a teacher who feels stuck in a routine, no longer challenged. From an existential perspective, the issue isn't external boredom, but a failure to create meaning within that role. If the teacher redefines their purpose, mentoring a student, designing a new curriculum, or using every class as an experiment in how to be human together, the work regains meaning. This is not magical thinking. It's the simple truth that meaning often depends on the narrative we choose to tell about our actions. Now let's take a quick detour into film and pop culture because existentialism thrives in stories. Consider the film Groundhog Day. At first glance, it's a rom-com with a time loop gag, but underneath it's a meditation on meaning. Given infinite time, how do you choose to live? The protagonist initially uses the loop selfishly, then descends into despair, and finally, through continuous work on himself and his community, finds meaning in helping others. That arc is a perfect existential parable. Freedom, choice, guilt, transformation. Or think about movies like The Truman Show, which confront the illusion of a scripted life. Truman's escape is existential. He must decide to leave comfort and face an uncertain reality. These narratives resonate because they dramatize what philosophers discuss. To live authentically, you must confront illusions, accept responsibility, and choose freely even when consequences are unknown. Before we wrap up, here are 5 practical steps you can try this week to begin living more existentially. 1. Journal one choice you made today and ask, did I choose this out of fear, habit, or freedom? Be honest. 2. Identify one role you play, job title, parent, partner, and describe how it limits you. Pick one small way to expand that role toward who you want to be. 3. Spend 5 minutes imagining your ideal life and one concrete step toward it. Then take that step, even if small. 4. Practice an experiment in truth-telling. Share a mild, authentic preference with someone instead of hiding it. 5. Once this week, sit with the thought of your mortality for 3 minutes. Let it sharpen, not scare. Then write down one thing that mattered more clearly afterward. If you want to keep exploring, here are 2 directions that'll deepen your understanding. First, read a primary text. Try Sartre's short essay, Existentialism is a Humanism, or Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. Both are accessible and provocative. Second, explore a modern application. Look into existential psychotherapy or the work of Simone de Beauvoir on gender and freedom. These both show how ancient-seeming questions about meaning and choice remain urgent and practical. We started with a simple, terrifying thought. Imagine everything you believed meant nothing. Existentialism takes that thought and refuses to let it lead only to despair. It says, yes, there is no hidden manual, but you are not powerless. You are the author, and the blank page is terrifying because it means choice, but also beautiful because it means possibility. If this resonated with you, consider watching our next video that dives into a single existentialist thinker, Jean-Paul Sartre, and breaks down his ideas into everyday choices and exercises you can use to cut through bad faith. You'll learn how to spot it in your life, how to act against it, and how to create meaning that lasts. Click here to continue the conversation, and if you're curious, leave a comment about the hardest choice you've ever had to make. Sometimes sharing the weight makes the choice easier to carry. Thanks for watching. Life won't hand you answers on a silver platter, but by facing that fact, you might be surprised at how brightly you can light your own path.